We are here today with the former Prime Minister of Australia, Mr. Kevin Rudd. Thank you for giving us your time today, Mr. Rudd.
Good to be with you, Brian.
We're really interested in your work on Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and we're interested in terms of your encounter with Bonhoeffer, in terms of what was it about Bonhoeffer and his writings that drew you to him originally.
Yeah, I was interviewed, I think, by Kerry O'Brien in 7:30 Report not long after I became leader of the opposition, and asked who was one of the greatest influences on my life. And my answer was Dietrich Bonhoeffer. I could tell by the absolutely blank look on Kerry's face that this was not engendering a full-throated, shall we say, broad centre-left response.
Yeah.
But anyway, about Bonhoeffer, as a kid at the Australian National University, and having grown up there with the Evangelical Union, of which I was secretary, Bonhoeffer's letters from prison were kind of part of our general reading.
Yeah, right.
So if you read his letters from prison, these are extraordinary documents because I would describe them as primary theology. It's not academic theology, which he wrote a lot prior to his being arrested by the Gestapo in 1943. It was him dealing with his day-to-day Christian life in prison, in Tegel prison in Berlin, and the hope of release, the failure to be released, what actually constituted the essence of his Christian faith under those circumstances. And so for me, this is Christianity in extremis, and therefore is a moving and real reflection of what faith means in practice. And I think then through that, you engage in the wider corpus of Bonhoeffer's writings, of which there's a substantial body. And then you look at the quite remarkable impact of his theology, the content of his theology, as formally expounded, dealing with the rise of Nazism from 1932 in Germany, about the time he was beginning his academic career, through until his arrest in 1943. And this is a remarkable journey where he also has to apply his Christianity in a practical way and decide, was he going to defend the Jews or not? Was he going to stand up and speak against what's called the Reichskirche at the time, the German official church, or not? Was he going to take his faith seriously and work with the confessing church or not? What risks would he take in establishing the Theological Training Institute at Finkenwald, which was outside the authority of the Reichschurch? And what did he then do when, of course, the Gestapo closed it down? So his theology of dealing with what I would describe as the theology of the below, standing by those people who were direct victims of a totalitarian system and becoming an intelligent voice for and action of dissent, was something which commended itself to me at an early age.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
In your Bonhoeffer article, you identify common but really unsatisfactory ways that Christians sometimes engage with politics, including, for example, the vote for me, I'm a Christian phenomenon, or the identification of particular legislative goals, moral perhaps, that might be identified with a perceived Christian position. Can you say anything about these ways of engaging against the backdrop of someone like Bonhoeffer?
I think the first thing I'd say, reflecting on Bonhoeffer's life, is that if we take our Christian faith seriously, then what Bonhoeffer teaches us is that it requires of us not a partial or episodic engagement with the public space, but a comprehensive engagement with the public space. And by public space, I mean the great public debates of the age. Bonhoeffer rails against what I would describe as a privatized Christianity. That is a narrowly defined spirituality, which is about narrow forms of Christian and or church observance. And in fact, he says, perhaps echoing the sentiments of Charles Wesley, or John Wesley in a much earlier age, I should say, when he said, "The world is my parish." And the world, meaning the physical world and beyond national boundaries, but the world also in terms of the material needs of human beings and not just their spiritual needs. And remember, Wesley in that tradition would be categorized today as definitively evangelical. In fact, was ridiculed by the established Anglican Church at the time for being so. And remember that Bonhoeffer's theology would also be regarded as evangelical. But at the same time, he sees absolutely no contradiction in that on the one hand, and a call to social justice on the other at all levels. And I think in this age, what I would say is that if Bonhoeffer was with us today, he would be leading global activism on climate change. He would be leading global activism on the injustices of global capitalism and the need to rewrite the social contract. He'd be leading global activism on the continued impact of authoritarian states around the world on oppressed minorities. And so my overall conclusion from Bonhoeffer's life and work is that his applied Christianity was comprehensive. It was not compartmentalized into something narrow, into some sort of tiny sacred space.
Thank you.
Yeah, just building on from Sarah's question, and I know you wrote that article, from memory, correct me if I'm wrong, prior to becoming Prime Minister. Is that
Trying to become
correct?
leader of the opposition, actually.
Yeah,
I didn't write it as an appeal for votes. I wrote it because someone asked me to write it, and so what do you do?
Yeah. And I suppose, one of the key things from that article, you speak about a Christian's response to two things: throwing us, something in the spoke of the state, the wheel of the state, so to speak, and being a voice for the voiceless, in kind of the way Christians can engage in the political realm. So my question is, after having been in office for the period of time that you were, has your perspective changed in terms of an optimal way that you would say Christians or faith communities should engage in the political realm? Because I know there's obviously been a lot of changes even since then. We've had the Royal Commission that's happened into child sexual abuse. There's also been particularly in America, the evangelical vote now, which is completely endorsed the current president, Donald Trump, in a way that wasn't even the case in George Bush necessarily in the past. So I suppose the general question is, what would optimal Christian engagement or church engagement with the state look like? And have you changed your perspective after being in that hot seat, so to speak, with Christians engaging with you?
I think there's a danger for Christians at either end of the spectrum to limit applied Christian ethics to one end of the spectrum or the other. Yep. At one end, we see, let's call it the Trump phenomenon, whereby the standard refrain is, and pardon me for paraphrasing an American accent, but I'm not voting for my pastor. Open brackets. We kind of know what Trump's like. Close brackets. Then there's a second, and I think even more curious form of theologizing about that, which said, and so with David and Bathsheba, and so with the fallen figures of Jewish history, this too could be a fallen figure who nonetheless exercises a great prophetic function and kingly function for the righteous of the time. And then you've got those who, on on top of the above, widening the circle out slightly, say that Christianity in public politics is only about the so-called life questions of abortion, euthanasia, and same-sex marriage, or let's call it traditional marriage. Then you have, at the other end of the spectrum, those who think that Christianity is purely about social justice in action. It's got nothing to do with private religious faith or any of the life questions, which it does. And so what you see is this kind of polarization within the Christian church itself, and as a consequence, its engagement with the state. My reflection on Jesus of Nazareth and Bonhoeffer's life is that Jesus is concerned about us individually, concerned about the notion of eternity, concerned about questions of life, human life and dignity, its beginning and its end. And he's equally concerned about social justice in between.
Yeah.
And he's equally concerned about the planet, and that when we are Christian teaching talks to us about being stewards of creation, examining carefully the state of environmental degradation of the world, I'm not sure would make the Nazarene entirely pleased. And so what I'm saying is that across this spectrum, there is a proper basis to engage the political establishment, rather than saying God is only interested in that extreme, or frankly, that extreme. It's either Donald Trump as the new King David, or Greta Thunberg, and there's nothing in between.
Yeah, that's a good
Whereas
point.
I think Jesus of Nazareth, if you look at his ministry, the wonderful capacity to upset every single shibboleth and every single, shall we say, narrow preconception. If there's a unifying principle, it is I, as Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus Christ, Jesus of history, the Christ of eternity, I stand for the lowly. Whether it's a planet that can't defend itself, whether it's the rights of the unborn, whether it's the rights of the poor, it's a fairly consistent, or the rights of women, frankly.
Yes.
Given his revolutionary approach to women, given first century Palestine. And that we have to be comfortable with the discomfort that provides each of us. Jesus was a deeply discomforting figure.
Great answer. Wow, thank you.
I feel like saying preach it, brother, but sorry, it's not maybe the right thing to say. We just have one last question for you. I'm conscious that time is running out, but I recently showed my kids the National Library's video of Coral Bass and Dub Leffler's Sorry Day picture book. And at the end of that video, you present a message to kids explaining more about Australian government policies and the Royal Commission into the Stolen Generations. And then you encourage children to become missionaries of reconciliation in their own communities. What does it mean to you to be a missionary or agent of reconciliation, and why is it important to you?
Well, consistent with, I think, what Jesus of Nazareth says, consistent with Handel's reflection of that in the Messiah, which is every valley should be exalted and every mountain laid low, and consistent with Bonhoeffer's theology of the below. When we look at the objective suppression of Indigenous peoples in this country and around the world, you can either just ignore it, or you can do as the rich man did with the tale of the Good Samaritan and walk by, or you can stop, pause, take time and act in however little circle that might be. So that when you hear one of your friends mouth off down the pub about Aboriginal people, or people of different ethnicities beyond our First Peoples, then you can either just choose to shut up because it's not socially popular to stand up for minorities, or you stand up for them. Silence isn't an option. What Bonhoeffer teaches us is that silence is not an option. And there are consequences for speaking out. Half of the people in the pub may go, oh, didn't know you're a holy Joe, walk away. But guess what? A couple of other people drinking next door might come and join your circle saying, yeah, actually, that's good, you know. So when I say about being missionaries in your own community, in your own circle, a missionary, as I would understand it, takes a message of an eternal truth, which is whatever the color of our skin and whatever our ethnic tradition, each of us has an equal human dignity in the eyes of the Creator. And am I going to reflect that in what I say and what I do? Am I going to be silent? Or am I going to be a change maker or a reinforcer of an ugly status quo? And it's a daily decision, how we act in those circumstances, particularly in a COVID-19, post-COVID-19 world, where many of our Asian Australians and Chinese Australians are being victimized for the simple reason of their ethnicity. They've got nothing to do with the decisions of the Chinese Communist Party in Wuhan. In Hubei province. Yet for some convenient kind of racialist reason, they become stigmatized. So if you see that happen, as I did recently in the streets of New York, then you either act or you don't. I'll finish with this little story. Yeah. So just as the virus was breaking out in New York, I'd been to visit a friend in Bellevue Hospital, which became the epicenter of the treatment of COVID cases in New York before I came back to Australia. And I was walking away from the hospital, having visited my friend. And I ran into this old Chinese man on a street, mid-70s, early 80s, being abused by this white American in the foulest of language and telling him to get out of the country. So I stopped. And as you know, and it's on the record, I have never used bad language in my life. That was a joke, by the way. And I also have a theory, by the way, that given Jesus grew up in a carpenter's workshop, there may have been the odd expletive in the carpenter's workshop as well.
I think that's probably likely.
So I just leave that to one side. You can have a seminar on that subject. But as you know, I've never sworn in my life. Anyway.
Never heard anything.
Never heard anything. So then I just unleashed against the white guy. I just stopped and then took him on for being a racist, ... Okay.
Yeah, wow.
And the whole street stopped.
Yeah.
And he slunk away. And then the old Chinese man came up to me to thank me. And I said, it's okay, it's fine. It's just, you know, because he obviously assumed I was an American, I suppose. And then this huge, tall, strapping white guy comes charging towards me. I thought, hello, I'm about to be decked. Boom. Streets of New York can be battlegrounds.
Yeah, that's right.
Anyway, Bonhoeffer would have found that out in the 1930s when he was there on a couple of occasions. And he came up to me and he then thrust out his hand and he shook my hand for defending this guy's civil liberties, for which reason he had fought in America's overseas wars. Go figure. So as I said, if you do the right thing, and I'm not saying I've done it in all circumstances, no. I'm as failed as the rest of you, but I'm just giving you a recent example of me doing this just as a private citizen in a foreign country. You'll be surprised that if one person stands up, other people stand up. And frankly, it has an effect on the self-confidence of bullies. We all, what's the word I'm looking for? We're all required to account to our own conscience. And then in a secular world, pass the shaving mirror test of life each morning, which, looking at the shape of your beard, you have problems with.
Yeah, well, my wife would agree. It's the lockdown.
Yeah. I had to shave mine off. I was doing an interview this morning. on the CNN, I think it was. Yeah.
We've run out of time. You've given us already more time than we asked for, so we're incredibly grateful, Mr. Rudd, for engaging with us on this issue and giving us your time. So thank you very much.
That's okay. A word of encouragement to all of you who are studying divinity or theology is this is a worthwhile pursuit to take this time to think and reflect on not just the nature of God, but what it means for our lives. And then my second word of encouragement would be then to go and act.
Unbelievable. Thank you.
Okay, folks, I better run. All the best and go well.
Thank you so much. You too.
All right.